Hey everybody, this is going to be a fairly short video on something that seems like it should be more complicated. I've worked out the details on how to rig up a slip clutch chuck for rod building that you can use in a rod dryer or use on a finishing motor. And this slip clutch chuck has a neat feature in that it has interchangeable inserts so that you can put in anything from a finished grip into it, or you can put in just a rod blank section into it with nothing on it, and you can make different inserts in various sizes for different size openings you need for the different situations you'll run into when you're needing a dryer or you're needing a finishing motor set up. And the mystery item in the thumbnail for the video is actually a baby bottle. And I know that's funny, but if you find the wide mouth baby bottles that don't have the narrower opening, they have a wider opening that the nipples go into. It's plenty big enough in diameter for most any rod grip that you would run across or that you would build yourself. Since the nipples are interchangeable, it has a built-in feature there where you can make different setups on different nipples to go into the bottle and to hold either your rod grips or your rod blanks in various sizes. And you can buy the nipples separately from the bottle, so it's a pretty economical system once you get it set up. It won't run you a lot of money long term to make different inserts and things for it. And the way we're going to attach it to the motor itself is real easy, and it allows for some variation in height and things like that. So your setup doesn't have to be dead on perfect in order for this setup to work for you. What brand of baby bottle you're using really doesn't make any difference. They're all silicone rubber nipples. They all have a lot of flexibility. They stretch a little. You can cut your hole diameters in the nipples smaller than what you actually are using or placing into it, and it will stretch and conform to the size that you need for a good tight fit. I believe the kind I've got here is called Tommy TP or Tommy TP or something like that, and it's kind of a nice set up on the nipples because it has rings made into it that might make it a little easier for you to center up your holes. You just follow one of the rings or in between the rings as you're cutting with scissors in order to get your hole diameter the way you want it. For smaller diameter stuff, you can usually just cut a slit in the tip, and that will be tight enough of a friction fit in order for your rod blank to go in there. I've got a really tiny one here I'll show you. I just barely cut a little notch into the tip of it, and that's enough to hold that to where you can turn it and still have a good tight fit on the blank section that you've got in there. You can also push the nipple in towards the bottle if you want to do it that way, and if you cut an X pattern across the tip and push it in, it will open up as I'm showing you here, and you can put larger diameter rod blank sections into an opening like that. So it's obvious that this is going to be a versatile rod chuck and pretty inexpensive to make new inserts for also. What I'm doing here is definitely optional. You don't have to do this, but I found that if you just take a little acetone and a paper towel, you can rub the print on the outside of the bottle that I have. They might not all come off this easy, but you can rub that off. So it's just a clear bottle at that point. Still pretty obvious what it is. I don't really care. I'm not trying to win a fashion competition with my rod building equipment. I just want it to be functional, and if I can make it myself, that's a bonus for me. Now, as to how we're going to attach this, I'll show you what I'm using here. I'm using 1/4 inch by 20 machine screws. You can pick these up at most any hardware store. And I chose to use stainless steel for mine. You don't have to do that. The only reason I did that is because I'm using magnets in this build, and the magnets don't stick as well to the stainless steel as they do to regular steel screws. It makes them move a little more freely. I'm also going to be using a wing nut. It's a 1/4 by 20 threads on it. I'm going to be using neoprene washers, and the neoprene washers are kind of a rubbery washer. You can usually find them in a plumbing section somewhere by the faucet washers, or In the case of this Home Depot store, I bought this one. It was in a drawer in the screw section. There's a drawer that had different size neoprene washers. And I'm going to be using some rare earth magnets with a 1/4 inch hole in the center of it. These are a little harder to find. You'll probably have to order these from Amazon or eBay or something like that. They're not super expensive, and you'll find other uses for them too if you build things. You can also use them as a tensioning setup for thread if you want to use that. I've tried it. I don't like it as much as the tensioner that I came up with for my rod wrapping jigs. Actually, that's the reason I have all these magnets, is because before I came out with my finalized version of the rod wrapper that I was going to sell to people, one of the thread tensioning devices I used was magnets because so many other people like them. I didn't like them as much personally. They're just more of a hassle for that particular setup, but for what I'm doing here, they're perfect, and I'll show you how we're going to set that up. You're also going to need another washer that could be either plastic or it could be nylon, like a nylon type of washer you can find in a lot of hardware stores. You could use a fiber disc. You can find some of the fiber discs at hardware stores with a 1/4 inch hole opening on it also. Even a piece of paper or cardboard or basically anything that has a little friction to it. You could use probably even an extra neoprene washer for this if you wanted to use that. I chose to use one of the high density polyethylene washers that I make myself that go on the rod wrapping jigs that I sell because I have so many of them, and it really works well for this application. What you don't want is something really thick here because you don't want to lessen the pull or the repulsion of the magnets for the slip clutch mechanism. So you don't want to put something really thick in between the magnets. What this part will do is allow you to lock it down if you want it locked down to where it won't really turn. So anything that you can use to put between the magnets where you can tighten them down where the magnets don't actually touch each other and will give it just a little friction there, that will work perfect. Now we're going to need to get a hole in the center of the bottom of the bottle itself. And to do that, I'm using a soldering iron. There's a little raised point where these bottles come out of the mold, and it's really hard to start a drill bit there. But you can take a hot soldering iron and poke a little hole right in the center of that bottle. Then you can come back with a drill bit and drill it out to the size you need. What you want is a hole that's just slightly bigger than the screw that we're using, that 1/4 by 20 screw. 1/4 inch hole would work just fine, so you could use a 1/4 inch drill bit to drill your hole once you have it started. Once you've drilled the hole out to your final size, you'll just want to check the inside and remove any little burrs or anything, and you can probably do that with your fingernail. So you're going to use your screw, and you're going to add a neoprene washer to the screw head side and push the screw through from the inside of the bottle. That way the end of the screw is sticking out from the bottom of the bottle. Then we're going to add another neoprene washer. And what those neoprene washers do is allow some friction there. The metal on the plastic spins a little too freely, but if you put a little rubbery washer on there, that will keep it from spinning too easily if you want to lock it down. Then we're going to add a rare earth magnet. In between the two magnets, I added the plastic washer. You'll want to check the polarity on those magnets. You want them repulsing from each other. You don't want them closing in on each other. We're going to use that repulsion of the magnets as the pressure for the slip clutch so that you can adjust the tension of it. Because we're using magnets and there's a repulsion force there, but there's no physical contact between the two magnets, when the bottle spins freely, it won't back your wing nut off and mess your tension up on it. Once you've got it set, because the magnets never actually touch each other, your wing nut can't back off or tighten up and increase or decrease your tension there. The little plastic washer in between the two magnets allows you to tighten the wing nut all the way down and lock the bottle so it can't turn freely like you would if you want it to be a slip clutch. You can also lock it down by tightening that wing nut all the way down. The plastic's just there to keep the two magnets away from each other. They're somewhat brittle. You don't want to crush them or anything. Having a little bit of a damper there in between also provides you some friction on top of that. It just works really well that way. This is my rod dryer. It's just a little 10 to 12 RPM synchronous motor. It can turn counterclockwise or clockwise. You have to stop it and restart it in order to get it to reverse direction. But these are good little motors just for keeping a consistently slow RPM while your epoxy's drying. You could also use a higher speed motor in this chuck setup if you wanted something for applying finish or something like that. But I'm just going to use this rod dryer and show you how I'm going to attach the chuck to that using some clear vinyl tubing with a smaller diameter than the motor shaft or the screw that's sticking out of the backside of our chuck here. I'm also going to use my stands that are part of my wrapping jig setup. I'm going to use those as my dryer stands. It helps somewhat if you will heat this vinyl tubing up just a little bit. You don't want to get it too hot because it will melt and it will put off probably some pretty toxic fumes. So you want to just heat it up gently with a heat gun, maybe even a hair dryer, just to soften it up just a little bit, make it a little easier to push that vinyl tubing up over the motor shaft. And then you can thread your chuck using a screwdriver into the end of that vinyl tubing. It'd definitely be possible to use this setup with a solid mount instead of the vinyl tubing as your attachment method between the chuck and the dryer motor. And you could even slide a tube over the top of the vinyl before you assemble everything completely, before you thread the chuck into the vinyl. If you had a little tube that ran across the top of the whole thing, that would stiffen it up quite a bit also. But that little bit of flexibility in most cases isn't going to make that much difference, if anything at all, for most people. But if you've got a long distance between your dryer motor and your first stand, you might want to go ahead and use a solid attachment method or use a piece of tubing, stiff metal tubing over the top of the vinyl to stiffen that up a bit. But it works really well. I hope y'all liked it. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you make one, let us know in the comments below. If you use any different techniques for assembling everything, let us know also. And I'll talk to you guys later.